Just kind of a real quick snapshot. We've been doing the AI for business analysis stuff now since probably, October, September of last year. We kicked off a class in December. It's just amazing the feedback we get on the program, the amount of skills that people learn because of the hands-on nature of it. So Marc is going to teach you some very specific stuff here today. You're actually going to learn in this web seminar. But I want to make sure everybody knows there's a lot more to learn and you get hands-on practice as well. So Marc, go take it away. Let's jump into these folks and get them rocking and rolling.
All right. Well, I like to think about what you're going to see today as sort of version 2.0 of our, way of thinking about AI for business analysis. And when I say version 2.0, what I'm really talking about is the idea that, in the last year or so that we've been doing this stuff, we've been seeing a lot of changes, a lot of improvements, a lot of, fantastic developments occurring all over in terms of, who's providing these, generative AI agents, what they can do, what you're able to do. And of course, when we do our classes, when I do my consulting, when we do all of these kinds of things, it's a huge learning experience because, just as I always say in the classes, I'll teach you a few things and you'll teach us some things as well, because we're all discovering great new things that these agents and tools are capable of doing. Now, I've been in this business, since forever. And what I really love is that, we now have been able to sort of bring together two things that I think are really, really valuable as part of the software lifecycle. Now, yes, I'm still a developer. I still write code for a living. But, the analysis activities, figuring out what it is that you're trying to do before you get in and start doing it, as well as the testing activities, are two areas where the AI agents can really, really help. But there hasn't been a whole lot that's been presented or said about this. I mean, you go out there, everybody's talking about how you can use the AI agents to write your code, but how do you figure out what that code's supposed to do? And oh, by the way, how do you figure out that that code is actually doing the right thing? So I like to think of it as we're sort of filling in, both ends of the spectrum. Now, if you're familiar with the BA-BOK, the BA body of knowledge, you notice that there are, 6 of these so-called knowledge areas. And one of the things that we do that I like to cover and present and show people is that generative AI is able to help in all of these areas. And in fact, this is kind of a highlight of what you're going to be seeing today in this webinar. So for example, if you look at the knowledge area about requirements analysis and design, okay, we're going to jump in right away and see how we can create a number of different artifacts for the kinds of things that you're probably accustomed to doing as part of your business analysis work. We're going to be looking at how we can do this almost instantaneously using AI agents. More importantly, and one of the things I think is always a very fun activity, is to see how, because these AI agents are, well, they call them chatbots, we can engage in conversations with them. In fact, in the AI for Business Analysis class, we have a very fun exercise where we have people, we have you interact with the chatbot as if you were interviewing a subject matter expert. And some of the classes have actually had some really interesting interactions with their AI agents, including one that kind of created a whole little soap opera about the case study problem in doing that. But you can really engage with these agents. You can learn a lot of things, perhaps because of the way that the agents have been trained on lots and lots of information all over the web. You're going to get insights from these agents that you may never have thought about. All right. we talk a lot about thinking outside the box. These will certainly help you to think outside the box. A lot of the other tasks involved in doing business analysis and business analysis related work are made much, much easier through AI agents. I mean, we always talk about traceability and the fact that we might have a series of artifacts, and those artifacts have to be able to be kept in sync with each other. Doing that manually, that's boring, repetitive, drudgery work. People hate boring, repetitive, drudgery work. You know who likes it? Computers. So we'll give that job to our agents. We'll see how, for example, that we can, create a series of artifacts, modify one, and see how the modification is then reflected in related artifacts. So that the work of keeping things up to date, the ability to be a whole lot more iterative, incremental in our thinking and in our development work, very straightforward. Again, a lot of other activities that we would do as business analysts can easily be handled through the use of these agents. Now, the BA Bach also talks about different perspectives. And so again, the ability of the AI agents to generate things, to pull together large volumes of data, to be able to create models, to be able to give you the insights, maybe even evaluate the content that you have or that you have created. And by the way, none of this requires that you're starting from a greenfield project. One of the fun things that you can do is you can take, with certain agents, you can give them large documents and say, okay, give me the analysis artifacts that I should have created when this system was built. Okay. And again, if you're concerned about issues like, oh my gosh, if I upload my content to the web, it's going to be public. We're now getting into using what we call private GPTs or private AI agents, where it's possible, if you have the computing horsepower, that you can download a model like Llama 3, you can run it on your own computer, and many of the things that you do with ChatGPT or Claude can now be done locally without sending any information whatsoever out to the internet. This is probably going to be one of the big developments that we'll see over the next year that will help address some of those security issues that people are having. Now, one of my colleagues at SoftEd, when we got started doing this, said generative AI can be an accelerator, but we have to avoid accelerating the chaos. So in all of this, you'll see a whole lot of things being created. But one of the things that you'll hear me mention time and time again is the idea that we need to have a framework in order to be able to properly organize the content that we create and to keep track of all of the kinds of things that we have. Okay, so let's jump into actually doing some of these things. Now, some of the interactions I'm having with the AI agents have been sort of pre-canned, and there are two reasons for doing that. One of which is it's a lot faster to be able to do that than waiting for the agent to type everything out. And the second one is sometimes, as you know, with demos, there's no such thing as a demo without something failing. Like, the agent says, oh, you're out of time, or, oh, I'm down right now. So we'll be looking at a lot of these things in a fairly canned fashion, but I'm sure that between your questions and, David's jumping in, we'll go off book quite a bit and explore some of the great things you can do with agents. Okay, so how do you get started? Right now, whether you have an existing application or whether you're starting something from scratch, typically you need some kind of a starting prompt. Now, in our Agile Fundamentals class, we have a case study problem based around a coffee shop. In fact, this slide comes from that particular class, talking about the Green Mart coffee shop. Now, oh, by the way, when you're using AI, you should always have some fun. So when I was putting these slides together, I thought, now what am I going to use to illustrate this? So I went to ChatGPT, which now has DALL-E, the art generator, built into it. And so I said, create an image of a coffee shop inside a big box store called Green Mart. Right? So yes, this picture was AI generated. Right? So we have this little coffee shop example. And so now how do we get started with our agent? Well, there are really three kinds of approaches that you can use for getting started and providing that sort of initial starting prompt to an AI agent. One of them is, just a very minimal prompt. You say, outline an app for ordering coffee from a coffee shop, right? On the other end of the spectrum, if you have, for example, a lot of documentation and you're willing to upload that, using an agent that can accept large documents like Claude or the more recent GPT-4, then you can upload the documents, right? Always very interesting to see what you come out with. Here, we had a small definition of the problem that we saw on the previous page on that slide. So I simply took that, copied it, put it into the agent, and got a response. Now, this was actually kind of one of those things I did when I was first getting started with an AI agent, with ChatGPT, exploring around. I went, I wonder if I could create the kinds of artifacts that we do in our business analysis classes, our agile fundamentals classes, and so forth. And I wonder how well it creates those artifacts and how long it will take to create those artifacts. Well, the how long, almost instantaneously. How well, that was the surprise. That was the part where I was like, whoa. So what I did here was I simply gave it the description of the problem, and it came back and gave me a lot of information about this particular problem. Now, one of the things you will notice when you look at what the prompt comes up with is, what the response comes up with is some of it's useful, some of it's not. I saw a hand go up. David, do you want to read off the question?
Hold up, let me see. I'm not showing any questions in QA or in chat. So if someone has a question, just let us know. Chat it on in.
Okay.
Keep flowing, Mark. Keep flowing.
All right. Okay. So, what kinds of artifacts? Well, this list is just taken from the BA body of knowledge. Here are some of the kinds of things you can do, right? And so, for example, you might want to say, give me a list of stakeholders. Now, the interesting thing about this is, where does the agent get this information from? I mean, obviously, this information was not provided in the initial prompt. The initial prompt was just the description about customers in the store. There was nothing about supply chain partners and compliance teams, and even baristas weren't really mentioned in that initial prompt. Well, here's where generative AI adds its value. Because of the fact that it's been trained on all of the big large language models, have been trained on copious amounts of information. The basic way people describe this is they scraped most of the World Wide Web and then some, and train the language models based on that. So how does it know coffee shop baristas? Well, because of the fact that language association has been made over and over and over again. The ChatGPT, Claude, all of these agents, you just have to ask, well, tell me about what's involved in ordering coffee from a coffee shop. You kind of go back to prompt style number one, the minimal prompt, it's still going to tell you a lot about what's expected. Sometimes this is referred to as a metaphor. This is basically the idea that you haven't given it a lot of information, but its basic trained knowledge is there to be able to give you this kind of information. And so in many cases, it's suggesting things based on, well, I think if you were trying to do one of these, this is what I would come up with. Now, of course, you've probably heard the term hallucinations before, the idea that AI agents can make stuff up. Well, yeah, it's making stuff up here because we didn't give it to it. It's making it up based on its trained knowledge. Now, some of this is probably exactly what we want. Some of it may not be what we want. Now, if it's not what we want, of course, then we go in and we want to tell it, oh, we don't need to have that. You'll see some examples of that later on. And if you really want something, great, let's reinforce that. By the way, this technique is sometimes referred to in machine learning as reinforcement learning. The idea that which we want, we tell the agent, I want this, we'll get more of that. It reinforces those particular associations, and things where we don't want it, we sort of do the opposite of reinforcing. Okay, so here's a list of stakeholders. Now, what do you do with a list of stakeholders? One of the things you can do with that is create a RACI matrix. Now, this is one of those artifacts that when we try to teach people how to do this in a BA fundamentals or an Agile fundamentals course, I ask first question, have you ever heard of a RACI matrix? Yeah, different fractions will pipe up. Do you know how to create one? Do you regularly use one? And of course, we get the declining list of people every time. And this leads to what I sometimes refer to as the problem of it's a getting started problem. How do you get started with producing an artifact if you're not sure what it is, and maybe you've never seen really good examples of it? Well, the best thing that an AI agent can do for you at this point is to give you the example. Now, I just told it about the coffee shop. Then I said, give me a list of stakeholders. Right? That was the next prompt. The third prompt is now, can you organize these into a RACI matrix? Now, one of the things about that prompt by itself is that if you ask that, sometimes you don't really get the format that you want. So my reinforcement learning has been that when I ask for a RACI matrix now, I'll tell it, how do I want it? I'll say, create it as a table, one row per stakeholder type, and one column for each of the RACI. Now, you go, well, that's not the standard form of a RACI matrix. Well, yeah, but is this form more useful? Is this form more readable? One of the things you'll see again and again is that the AI agents are really good at being able to translate content from one form to another. Why? Translating content from one form to another is boring and repetitive. Who likes boring and repetitive? Computers, not people. Okay, so the result of this is a meaningful RACI matrix for our job. Now, of course, one of the other nice things when you ask for an artifact from many of these agents is it will also tell you what that artifact is. And this is actually a pretty good thing to provide. So if I were to take this content and make this available to the rest of my team for review purposes, here we have a little bit of an explanation of what that means. Better yet, if we're doing this interactively with the whole team, in other words, I'm not just producing a document that I'm giving to my team, but we're all sitting around looking at the screen at the same time. And someone says, I'm not really sure what accountable means. You can ask it, all right? So the AI agent can produce your artifacts. It can also serve as a research vehicle. One of those agents, Perplexity, actually even gives you references as you go along. So you ask for a RACI matrix, it will give you references about, what a RACI matrix is so that you can do your own learning. And again, this is really, really powerful. Many things, one of the reasons why, for example, our training courses are very much hands-on is the fact that the agents provide, really much better opportunities for going deeply into what you need to learn at that moment. And you get to learn how to use the agents to do your own learning. You get to learn how to learn. Okay. So again, coming back to the list of project starting artifacts, lots of those things. And we find that there's a basic pattern to how to use these things. You give the prompt, you say, here's what I want. You review the content. So for example, you might go back to the list here and say, I don't know if I need this group, or what about this group? Or, and again, you can engage in the conversation with the agent to review that. And then of course, if you have multiple different artifacts, then you can also reconcile those. You can say, for example, I'm going to update, I'm going to get a data model, I'm going to get a UI screen. Now, looking at the screen, I might say, I have a few other things that I want to enter here, or I want to reverse these, or split out first name and last name into two separate fields. Now, go back and give me the data model. Right? You'll get the updated version of that. You don't have to go individually say, okay, now who's going to update the data model? The agent.
All right, Mark, I got to stop. You have a phenomenal question, one I have not seen yet.
Phenomenal.
And all
Great.
the stuff we've done, I have not seen this question yet. This is very interesting, and I want to hear your answer to it. So suppose your organization has templates for these artifacts. How do we get AI to help us fill them out?
My guess, and this is, again, a guess based on my experience of doing this, is provide the template. So you say, here is our organization's template for blank. Can you fill this in from this content? Now, when I say that's a guess.
Couldn't you also upload the artifact itself? So Allison said she's done it and it works.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can give it the template. You can give it a similar artifact and say, now make me one of these for, this other problem. Yeah.
All right, great. Keep going, rocking and rolling, brother.
Yeah. And exactly. So when we talk about review sorry?
We're getting more people to say that does work. It's interesting because you've been teaching so much on how to build these things. We never really attacked it. We should attack it from the template side next. That's a really interesting thing.
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
Okay. So now we're going to get into, I think, what I like to call the version 2.0 approach to, business analysis, and specifically the requirements analysis activities using generative AI agents. One of the things that you definitely want to find out, because it is the framework on which we're going to hang a lot of different content. And by the way, when you mention artifacts, it's useful, I think, to separate the concept of artifacts versus knowledge. An artifact is a representation of knowledge. The model, the AI agent, is maintaining the knowledge. The knowledge can be extracted from the agent in a lot of different artifacts. Okay. In fact, this is really where the power is. We have to build up the knowledge. All right. Our job in prompting and reinforcement learning is building up the knowledge. We can then extract that in the form of artifacts. And if the artifact isn't the form that we want, again, we can adjust that. Whether it's simply saying, here's the format we want, or giving it a sample and saying, do it like this. Okay. So one of the things I find is really useful once you have an application, whether you're doing an agile development or traditional development, what's the principal process? So here we have, what's the principal process for this app? Now, I didn't ask the question really specifically. Because sometimes, as you know, when you're interviewing stakeholders, you have a specific question, you want a specific answer, but sometimes you want someone to free associate. So what I did here, and this is again a very powerful prompt I've found, I just tell it about what I want. And then I say, what's the principal process of the app? Sometimes people refer to this as the value stream. What's the order to cash? Okay, so it comes back, it gives me this description of the principal process. Sometimes I might say, okay, the principal process is blank, outline it. But I get this outline of this process. Now, of course, it's useful to understand that when we talk about organizing knowledge, it's useful to have a vocabulary. And this is a very old picture that I've been using for years and years and years to talk about 4 basic bits of vocabulary. What's a process versus what's an activity versus, a system is a collection of processes. Processes, are the activities performed by different actors. Activities then divide into tasks. Okay. It's a vocabulary. It helps to have a vocabulary for organizing that kind of information. So now I look at that model, or I look at this description, and I go, most of this looks like what I would be doing if I'm ordering coffee. This user registration kind of feels a little wonky to me. So the way in which I approach this is I don't go in and say, hey, number one, you're wrong. You do not happen every. No, instead I want the agent to be a little introspective. So I say, are all parts of this process done every time someone orders coffee? The agent comes back, goes, not really. The user registration is something that's done only once. Okay. So in other words, I had a thought. I wanted to check to see if the agent had the same thought. Sometimes it's sometimes a little more of a Socratic model than just declare it. In other words, you want to be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. Okay. So then is it appropriate to say user registration is a separate process from ordering coffee? Yeah, I think so. It says. All right. So what have we done? We now took a prompt that we asked for, what's the principal process? We then began an adjustment process. We used our sense as a business analyst. All right. In other words, don't check your brain at the door. Take the things that are sensible to you as a BA. You go, this looks like one process. This looks like another. And oh, by the way, this feedback stuff is totally optional. Now, why do I think it's optional? Well, I'm thinking about agile and minimum viable product and what do I need to get something out the door and, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So in my reinforcement learning, I essentially want to adjust the agent's scope of the problem. So now I have 2 processes. Those processes consist of a series of activities, 3 processes really, and have some dependencies between them. Okay, let's outline user registration in the form of a use case. Again, this is what agents are really good at doing, is changing up the format. So I can review that. Use cases are close to test cases. Again, promoting another dimension of what we can do with our AI agent. Give me a list of test cases, right? Now, again, these test cases are not necessarily terribly, structurally formatted at this point, but they're usually pretty adequate at being able to, we can look at these again, and I find it's really useful to look at things from a test perspective, because I can look at the test cases and I can say, that's in scope, that's not in scope, okay? Or I never thought about that one. Oh gosh, I never really thought about worrying about case sensitivity. And of course you get a lot of these. You get them very quickly, right? Now, someone says, well, we do our test cases in Gherkin format. Okay, great. It's just a format, all right? And again, coming back to that question that was asked before, this is one of those areas where many times organizations will have certain structures that they like to follow. They like their test cases written a particular way. So providing either samples or providing rules, or one of my favorite approaches is you get the agent to, through prompting, you get the agent to produce what you want. Then when all's said and done, you go to the agent and you say, now, how do I ask you to give me this same content or this same format all over again? And so you actually ask the agent to produce the prompt. You don't have to try to come up with a prompt yourself. You don't have to try to be the amazing person who creates the perfect prompt. You go through the dialoguing with the agent, and then when you get what you want, you say, now, how do I ask you for this again so that you give me this again, right? And it will do that. Okay. Now, as I said before, agents are really good at shifting up the formats. Now, at this time, and again, I always say at this time, crossing my fingers, because inevitably somebody will come up in the chat and go, oh, I found a custom GPT that will do this for you. Because there's so much evolving in the marketplace right now. There's so much evolving out there. Most of the agents that people are working with today are still kind of limited to producing text. As analysts, we like to work with diagrams. We like to work with figures. Okay, so I say, can you create a diagram for this? Now, I've learned that there are two open source diagramming frameworks, I should say, that work well with the big generative AI agents, Plant UML and Mermaid. And so I tend to like Plant UML. So I'll say, can you create a diagram? Can you do this as a swim lane diagram in Plant UML? Right? Now, this may not be as pretty as I would draw it by hand if I had my own tools available to me to do this. But given the choice between something that I can get really quickly and something that is absolutely picky perfect, I'll take something I can get quickly, something that illustrates the problem. Because many times when you look at even a diagram that gets generated in something like Plant UML, when you look at that diagram and you go, this doesn't match up to what I'm thinking, it's not that the problem is just the diagramming. The problem is probably the underlying knowledge. And you need to dialogue with the agent to correct the underlying knowledge or adjust that underlying knowledge, right? But being able to have this in a way that you're able to work on it, and when I say you, I mean you as a whole team can work on this live right then, right there, is huge. There's no going back and getting someone to open Visio and have to redraw the diagram, then they have to print it back out, put it in. No, it's just here, right? Now, one of these diagrams I find is really useful, and again, this goes back a long time, is an information model. Might think a data model. Right? How do I look at a problem, not from a perspective of what has to happen, but from the perspective of what are the things in the problem and their attributes and their relationships. So another question I'll ask is outline the data model. And, oh, by the way, can you do it in Plant UML format? Right? So again, now I can look at this and go, okay, so this thinks about customers. Customers have placed many orders. The orders can have many items on them. Where's the store? Again, I look at this model. It doesn't line up to what I want. I can prompt, I can go back around, we can iterate on this to get what we're looking for. And oh, by the way, as I'm doing that, it's keeping track of the whole problem so that the whole list of underlying processes, the whole list of underlying activities in those processes is continuously being updated. So I can ask, for example, I can look at the information model perspective. Oops, come on, roll. There you go. I can look at the information model perspective, and I can say, looking at all these entities and relationships here, can you give me a list of the real world activities that cause creation, updating, deleting of these different entities? In other words, I'm now taking the problem from two different perspectives and I'm merging those perspectives together. I'm beginning by doing a correspondence between those, two different models. And of course, I can put that into, a tabular format that's probably a little easier to understand. And again, I can look at this and go, I'm not seeing anything for setting up a store, or for, how do I have different menu items with different prices on sale in different stores? Is that a requirement I have? If I have that requirement, I need to be able to see that supported in the models that I'm creating. And the purpose of the models is no longer to just be deliverables. The purpose of models and artifacts is to be a representation of the underlying knowledge that exists within your agent. Right? And then you make the adjustments to the knowledge in the agent based on what you're seeing in the produced artifacts. So all in all, what's very important in all of this, and again, the question often comes up from people, how do you manage all of this content? For example, let's come over here and take a look at the actual underlying chat. So we have all of this different content that got produced. So now we go down and we're looking at, the concept of the principal process, or we look at the different processes. Do we keep this knowledge purely in the AI agent, or do we copy it out? Well, my recommendation is that, you work with the agent, but the agent has limited memory. So as you get something that is worth keeping, you want to copy that out and put that into whatever knowledge base that you currently use for the work that you're doing. This could be, for example, maybe you're using Jira to manage user stories. Now, I haven't shown you user stories yet, but user stories are definitely one approach that you can use for capturing your content. If you have some sort of a meta model or a data modeling, formalism, you can get the content out in a way that can populate, some sort of data modeling, capability. If you have something that keeps track of use cases or test cases, again, you can copy that information out. And more importantly, once you have that in a format, you can always provide that back to the same agent or to different agents. One of the other things that you can certainly do is you can ask multiple different agents the same question. And when you ask multiple different agents the same question, for example, here we can say, here's the coffee shop app. Give me a list of stakeholders. So we see a list of stakeholders from ChatGPT. Well, let's come over here and let's go to Claude. I'm going to start with Claude, and I'm going to go back, give it the same starting prompt. Make it big enough that you can see it. Now, Claude is having a little bit of formatting issues at this point. But again, the content is there. The content is good. The next thing I will do is I will ask it for a list of stakeholders. Again, I'm going to ask the same question. I could also ask the question about the principal process. Let's see, where is the list of stakeholders in here? Here we go. Give me a list of stakeholders. Now, I have two different lists. The lists are obviously different. Do I just simply print them both out? No. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, here's the list from another agent. Here is a list from another agent. Compare and merge the two lists. I will paste that in. Now, you could have gotten the lists from different agents. You could have had, as we do in one of the classes, you do your own brainstorming, then you ask the agent, and then you merge the results of your own brainstorming with, what is produced by the agent. And so now we have a complete merged list. We could then take that, ask for the racy matrices or ask for other things, and we could do the same thing with a number of the other activities, a number of the other different artifacts we're creating. The speed at which we can create artifacts, the speed at which we can create content, merge content, and evaluate content, really, is really the game changer. I mentioned user stories. Can you outline a set of user stories for this coffee shop? Assume I am building this from scratch. Now, one of the things about the way that we create user stories is that the user story creation that you're seeing here, is based on, I guess what we would say is the generally understood knowledge that the agents have based on their training data. In other words, if you say, well, we don't write user stories this way, we write them differently. This provides a great opportunity for going, how are our user stories different in style from what, is produced here?
Hey, Mark, a question.
Yes.
In comparing the lists, if the same thing is worded differently in the lists, will it, aka your AI tool, interpret and realize that they are the same or different and therefore should be separate items?
Well, in the words of, I would say it should, but this is a matter of trust but verify. In other words,
Got it.
you can't just take the content and go, okay, there are new duplicates here, right? I'm going to take a look at this and I'm going to ask it to produce this. Now, by the way, Claude in particular has been having a lot of formatting issues recently. So you'll notice it says here, internal stakeholders, Greenmart corporate management, and then all of a sudden, Greenmart coffee shop employees, Greenmart IT department. So one of the things that you want to do when you look at any of this content, I find it's useful in this case, for example, to copy it out into its native markdown format to be able to review and edit and modify and so forth. But, certainly we would look at these and go, has it merged them the same? Has it done things differently? I got a better way of answering that question. Looking back to when you merged the lists of stakeholders, can you create a single table with one column for the merged stakeholder, a second column for the stakeholder from your list, and a third showing the stakeholder from the other list? Now, this is one of those here goes nothings, but if we want to compare these things, it's probably useful to say, where do we have cases where, for example, if we look at the lists, we see, for example, Greenmart corporate management was known as business owners executives from the other list. Coffee shop employees were listed as store managers, baristas, and staff in the other list. So, what I did here, and again, I think what you want to take away from this is how to use the AI agent. You asked a question, a very valid question, about does it understand the differences between the names? And I went, well, yeah, but I then verified it. I created myself a little experiment. I said, give me the merged list and then show me the two sources so I can take a look at it and see what the differences happen to be.
Hey, there's some great feedback on this, by the way. Tim goes, traceability can be very important. Get out of my way a little. Being able to distinguish between info from an agent, info that you supplied yourself is going to be very useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, we can do this from a number of different sources. For example, if I look at the list of user stories, okay, if I have the user stories and then I have the process steps, right? Now, maybe I got the process steps from somewhere else. Maybe I'll make them up right here. Outline the process steps for a customer to order coffee. Assume the customer is registered and logged in. Start the process with the customer placing the order, end with the customer receiving the coffee. Again, I don't have to be absolutely perfect with the structure of my prompts. All right. In fact, there's a lot of advantage to being kind of loosey-goosey when you prompt. Again, we're not trying to, when we're doing the chatting, we're not trying to be, a developer writing a one-shot prompt because we're going to embed that into some Python application. We want to have a conversation. Okay, so we have these process steps. Build a table that associates the process steps and user stories defined above. Again, I'm not specifying the columns. I want to see what the agent comes up with. Oh, it's numbering the user stories? Yuck. Yuck, period. This is too hard to follow. Can you put the name of the user story, text of the user story into the second column? And yes, I do really say yuck. Again, why make things hard for ourselves? Okay, so it's putting its tables into a nice little, frame, which of course, I think it's even if I zoom it out. So if you say, oh, I need to see
stuck
the
in the
whole
frame box. You got to
Sorry?
output. You're stuck in the frame box. You're going to have to output into something to see everything.
Again, one of my favorite things, Control C, go to a Word document. I know a Word document's like not the perfect way of doing this, but in the interest of time, go to a Word document. There we go. There's my table. And of course, I can probably then do a little bit of formatting to make the table a little easier to read. But again, I have this correspondence between the various elements. And, this is the important aspect of managing all the content, is while I'm going to have the chats to create a lot of the content, I want to have an organizational structure in mind for being able to, keep track of all of that content.
So, Mark, you got like 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the best bet would be to catch something you really want to hit on, and then we can dive in some questions.
Again, the only other thing that I would ask is I've got user stories. I'd say what makes up the minimum viable product. Again, I'm on my way to prioritization. Get multiple perspectives out of the problem. My final thought always is, how do you get good at this stuff? It's like the old joke. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Right? And yes.
So, Mark, first question is, we're on the web seminar here, and Anthony goes, this has been great. I definitely learned some new uses. However, I feel user stories are one of the lowest value things that BA can bring to the org. I love a future session looking at applications for supporting strategy, value analysis, waste avoidance. How much of that stuff is covered in the class?
As much as you can take. Now, and the reason why I say that is because of the fact that, we provide in the class, we provide a basic framework of doing these kinds of activities. The learning takes place in the questions that you have, in the thoughts that come to your mind, in the, last night I was thinking about this and.
Pop it out. So the key here is that you're gonna get into a lot of hands-on activities, but as you said, the Socratic method is going to come apply, because your brain's going to be working at 1,000 miles per hour while you're doing things, saying, well, what about this? Hey, I need this, and you're going to be able to magically show it.
Right. I mean, imagine that, from a training perspective, and the same thing is true when you're, learning to apply this in your real work. When we do consulting with teams on adopting AI approaches, it's the same thing where when you get in and you start doing it, you see things that are unique to you, or that no one ever thought about before, or that, again, it's getting it to apply to your own problem.
Yeah, here's a great question. Can you prompt AI to generate information or data based on information formats or data available on an internet site?
Great question. Last week, in last week's class, somebody had a very similar question. I'm wondering if this is the same thing. They said, I have a whole bunch of data and they said in JSON format. Can you reverse engineer, they started with, can you reverse engineer a data model for that? Can you reverse engineer a user interface? Or, speaking about automation testing, I have some HTML screens. Can you give me the Selenium locator expressions for the various elements on the screen? Because, as you know, if you have done any sort of test automation, building reliable automation tests, knowing good locator expressions from bad ones is huge. Okay. Free AI art generators.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I don't know of any off the top of my head.
DALL-E is free.
No, not. It's in ChatGPT.
Sorry. DALL-E is not free.
Yeah.
There is something called Stable Diffusion, which you can actually download that. Again, just like the local, chatbots, things like LM Studio, you can download that, run that yourself. If you have if you have sufficient capability, you can do the same thing.
Same thing. Have you played with, I guess, Microsoft? Does Copilot actually do? I guess Copilot might be doing
Copilot. I mean, again, I always tell people at the beginning of the classes, for example, never take my word about what can be done or can't be done.
It changes so fast
because it changes every week. Yeah,
but Copilot's a good one, I think.
Yeah. And if you have an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, Adobe has some really powerful stuff, again, behind their firewall. But again, if you already have access to things like Illustrator or, Photoshop.
Miro also does imaging, by the way. So if you're in the Miro board and you want to create images in some of the text you're writing, it does it instantaneously. Not great, but it works.
Yeah. And people who have organizations that have Microsoft 365 subscriptions also tend to have access to these.
Also, Copilot uses DALL-E 3. The thing about Microsoft, which is so bizarre, is they have access to the OpenAI environment with tools, but they are creating their own environment. So I get confused of which one the tools are pulling from.
Try and evaluate. That's all I can say.
Read, listen, and evaluate. All right, folks. Well, it's past 1:00. We'll get the slides out to you as well as the recording. Mark, as always, phenomenal job. Oh, you're born to do this stuff, Mark. I love it. All right, we're getting some great accolades out there.
Great. Okay.
All right. Have a great rest of your day, folks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Feel free to reach out to us.